President Biden is seeing a string of bad poll results this week. No surprises there. His approval numbers have hit yet a new low as the administration tackles inflation, the baby formula crisis, the war in Ukraine, and much more. On May 20th, the poll aggregator 538 found Biden's approval dipping to 40.7%, while 53% disapprove, though as of today, those numbers stand at 41% and 54%, respectively.
A new CBS poll found 69% of Americans say the economy is bad, 65% say Biden is slow to react when issues arise, and 63% describe the state of the country as uneasy and worrying.
And in a new Amherst YouGov poll, 7 in 10 Republican voters said Congress should move to impeach Biden after the party sees its much-anticipated victory in November's midterm elections. Now, here with us to discuss is political reporter from The Hill, Julia Manchester, and reporter for Real Clear Politics, Philip Wegmann. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
So, Julia, what do you hear from Democrats? Are they has panic set in? Do they have any strategy, or are they just bracing for the inevitable at this point and not really even trying? Because that's what it seems like.
Well, I think for a while they've been, nervous going into this midterm election, especially for those frontline House Democrats who are facing, very uphill election climbs going into November. But, in terms of the strategy, look, that's a very good question. We've heard Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chair Sean Patrick Maloney very much urge his candidates to run like they're running for mayor, for example, make this as local as possible. And I think that's a strategy to turn this away from Biden and make it seem like a more local election, very much focusing on those issues that impact Americans every day. However, the issue is we are seeing sky-high inflation in this country. We're seeing shortages of baby formula, for example, a part of a broader supply chain issue in this country. And I think when you have those kitchen table issues that are, being felt very negatively by a lot of Americans, they naturally look to the person at the top to blame, and that is Joe Biden. And a lot of their members of Congress in their particular districts are Democrats. So, it seems like it's almost like the natural flow for these voters to vote these Democrats out because they're part of the party of the sitting president of the United States. So, in the House, it's one story. In the Senate, it's another story. I think for a while, Democrats have felt slightly more optimistic about the Senate because Republicans have had really an awful track record of recruiting their wanted candidates to run for Senate. And I think there's a concern that some of these candidates running on the Senate side could potentially be weak. However, I think Senate Democrats are facing a lot of the same issues that House Democrats are facing.
Yeah, and Philip, if you look into those poll numbers, you see things like indecisive and not taking action. It suggests that there is actually an opportunity here for Biden to actually be seen doing something. Bill Clinton used to have the phrase that he wanted to get caught trying doing something, which meant even if it doesn't work, he wants the public to see that he's trying to do something. Instead, you have Pete Buttigieg out there saying that, baby formula shortage is just a problem that the free market produces, and there's nothing really the government can do about it. And then, days later, they're flying formula in, which is probably a very popular thing to be doing. So, Nixon did his price controls. Ford did his whip inflation now. These things worked to some extent, pushed it off to another degree, but in general, the public saw them as doing something. Is there anything what is holding back Biden from just looking like he's doing something?
Well, that's an excellent point. And I think that one of the more telling questions and answers that we got last week is when a reporter pressed Karine, the White House press secretary, on this question. It was, when was President Biden actually briefed on the baby formula crisis? And she wouldn't get into private discussions, obviously. So the reporter followed up with, well, was he briefed about it before last week? And she had to say yes. I think that this is a situation where if you look at the polling, the Biden administration, they started going downhill last summer with Afghanistan and with some of the problems with the lingering pandemic. And it was just sort of, out of the frying pan into the fire situation where, Afghanistan and COVID aren't necessarily moving the needle now. Now instead, it's things like, Julia just pointed out, it's the inflation, it's the cost of gasoline, vaccine. It's this baby formula shortage, something that I don't think any of us would have ever expected. And some of these things, maybe you can blame Biden for. Others, maybe not. But the thing is, whether or not he's responsible, it's entirely predictable that the American public is going to say, you're in charge, do something. And that's why I think that the sort of slow burn from the White House on the baby formula crisis here, where at first they were defending why they weren't using the Defense Production Act, and now they're all hands on deck trying to fly in formula from Europe and elsewhere. It does show some indecisiveness. It does show that lack of a steady hand. And remember, that was the central tenet of the Biden campaign. He was the guy who could be the elder statesman, who could be normal, who could bring us all back. We were stopping having these, red versus blue bickering arguments, and he was just going to calm things down. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, and so on his debut tour of Asia, President Biden unveiled his economic plan aimed at countering China's influence in the region, citing 13 nations who agree on his proposal. Biden also rebuked China's engagement with Taiwan, saying the U.S. is prepared to respond militarily.
And here's Biden's message to North Korea's dictator, Kim Jong-un. According to Politico, this moment was almost lost to history as the U.S. government cut off the president's feed before he could answer the follow-up question from CNN's Caitlin Collins, but reporters were able to hear the barely audible response. I don't think I was able to hear the response. It's a very pretty waterfall backdrop. Maybe, Julia, do you have more information about what quite happened there? I'm not sure what it was.
I don't. And to be honest, I couldn't really hear that response as well. But I think, when we're pivoting to foreign policy, especially as it relates to Asia, this is something that's obviously very important to the president, or should be important to the president. And I think it's one of those few foreign policy issues that could permeate the election as an issue that impacts Americans, especially when it comes to China. I cover House and Senate races, and I am hearing, especially in the Midwest, a lot of these Democrats running with these pro-manufacturing messages, wanting to get jobs back to the United States, in this sector, whether it's agriculture, or manufacturing. You're hearing them talk quite a bit about China. So it's very important that the person at the top of the party, in this case, President Biden, is strong on this issue of China as it relates not only to the economy, but also to, other areas such as, growing Chinese influence in the region. So, I don't think that comes across as the strongest response from the administration. And I'm curious to see how that impacts Democrats down the ballot.
Yeah, and Julia, real quick, wanted to get your reaction to the redistricting shuffle that happened in New York over the weekend. I reported over at The Intercept that everybody thought that Mondaire Jones was leaving New York 17 because Maloney was bullying him out of there, and he didn't want to enter a primary challenge with Maloney. That's part of it, but it turned out that Jones had his own polling in the district of New York 17, which Biden won by 10 points, that had him losing a close election in the general. And so clearly Maloney, in a +8 in the neighboring one, didn't feel confident there and wanted to move over to the +10. So if you have popular Democrats who are running from +8 and +10 districts, what does that say about what their prospects for the fall?
Yeah, it shows that they're in a very weak position, and I think also a lot of the infighting between between Democrats on this issue that we saw in the House last week sort of shows how weak of a position they are in. So it doesn't, especially in a state like New York, which in those districts should be good, particularly in the downstate area, should be good for Democrats. The fact that a lot of them, like Mondaire Jones, are facing these headwinds, in the first term of the Biden administration isn't a good sign.
Yeah. Philip, are you following what's going on in Pennsylvania at all? My sense is that that Fetterman is going to be a very strong candidate for the Democrats, given his messaging on a lot of the things we're talking about. And, the Republicans are still, we don't know what the outcome of the race is even yet. And both those candidates being, I would say, weak for different reasons. Is there as strong an opportunity as the Republicans have coming up in November? Is there any concern among people you're hearing from the current the people already in office that the opportunity could be partly squandered because of the personalities that thrive in the post-Trump, in still Trump world Republican Party?
Yeah, so I think that the general conventional wisdom here is that when it comes to Fetterman, he's an unconventional character, and that is something that a lot of voters they identify with, because he's not walking out there in sort of the trademark blue suit that every politician wears, and he's not sort of rolling up his sleeves performatively at the state fair. He's got the best situation that he could hope for right now. Obviously, he had a bit of a health scare with that heart attack, and one would think that might push him back on his heels a little bit. But when he looks across the way to the competition, you've got two candidates who are fighting each other, right? So instead of rallying around the flag, Republicans are still bickering, right? And I think that this is just one more chapter in the larger question of who actually is the kingmaker in the Republican Party. Is it Donald Trump, or is it somebody else? And we're going to see. I mean, if Oz gets the nomination here and he goes against Fetterman, one would think that this would be a year that would likely favor Republicans. But if Oz loses again, or excuse me, if Oz loses, right, and Republicans don't gain control of the Senate, a lot of those Republicans who are saying nice things about the former president in private, they're going to come out and in public start saying something that Chris Christie has been saying since Trump left office, which is that Trump lost them the Senate, and potentially he could lose them the Senate again.
Well, Phil, Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.